JavaScript is a programming language that is based on ECMAScript specifications, which is a standard set by European Computer Manufacturers Association, also known as ECMA. So whenever a new feature is added or updated in ECMAScript, that is reflected in JavaScript. The most recent update is known as ES6, which came to effect in 2016. From now on, ECMAScript will be adding or updating new features to the language on a yearly basis. So you will see ES7 in 2017 or ES8 on 2018 and so on. But there will be minor changes. The major changes were made into ES6. So what is changed in ES6? Quite a lot. It has made JavaScript a much better language to work with. We will begin by learning the new features added by ES6 as well as comparing them to the old ways of doing things, so that we know the difference and get in-depth understanding of JavaScript. Understanding ES6 is one of the most important things to learn and understand React. In React, you will be writing plain JavaScript along with new features added by ES6. So learning React is like learning JavaScript. Let's say modern JavaScript. Getting better at React means getting better at JavaScript. So let's begin by learning modern JavaScript from the very next lesson. A variable in JavaScript, but how about the value that it holds? Its value can be changed over time. For example, name, let's give it a different value. Let's give Jen, save and go to the browser and refresh. You see it changed. Okay, so that's how you create variable in JavaScript. Now in JavaScript, variables can hold many different kinds of data. They can hold strings, they can hold integer types, they can hold even the functions as their values, they can hold objects, arrays, all sorts of values they can hold. With ES6, there are two more ways of creating variables: const and let. Okay, so in this video, let's learn about const. So why did we need another method to create a variable when we have this one? Let me show you. If I want to create a variable whose value will not change over time, in that case, how would you create a variable? Before we had only this option, but now we have another option called const. So const lets you create a variable that's value cannot be changed. Okay, so let's begin. In fact, we can modify this one. Const name equals to Ryan. Now we changed the const here. This shouldn't work. So let's see what sort of error we get in the browser. Refresh. As you can see, uncaught type error, assignment to constant variable. So you cannot assign a different value to constant. Okay, so that's the whole point. In a situation like that where you know a certain variable whose value will not change over time, so in such situation you can use const to create variable. Okay, so if I get rid of this one, it should work. Okay, we can alert the name, refresh, it works. Okay, so this is one way of creating variables using const in ES6. In ES6, we have one more way of creating a variable, that is using let. Okay, so why would we use let? Let me show you. For example, let's say we have if statement, so it will check if the condition is true, it will do something. Okay, so let's move this here. Let's get rid of this as well. So if the condition is true, we create a variable. Okay, let's use the var keyword just to show you an example here. So if true, create this variable and alert this variable. Okay, let's save, go to the browser and refresh. We know it works, right? But if we come out of this scope and try to alert here, try to alert this name, this shouldn't work, right? But in JavaScript it works, because when you create a variable using var keyword, it becomes part of the window object. If I comment this out, and if we try to alert this variable, access this variable which is inside the if statement, it still works. As you can see, still works. Now let me show you what I mean by window object. So if you type window in your terminal, in the console, you can see it has, the window object has a lot of properties. Okay, now the one we created, this var, it should be available here as well. We can say window dot name, and you see we get the value of Ryan, because this has become a property of this window object. So we access the property using the dot notation here. Okay, so what if we don't want that? Because in many cases you don't want this to happen. In a larger application, this can be really problematic. There can be a conflict between variable names, right? So you can use the let keyword. Okay, it stays within its surrounding scope using the let keyword. Okay, so if we use let and we try to access the variable created with let outside of the scope, let's see what we get. Refresh. Let me copy this, open in a different tab. Okay, as you can see, it doesn't have anything. Okay, so if I inspect, now if I try window.name, it's empty. That's because it is not being part of the window object. It is not hoisted on top. It is still remained in this scope. Okay, so that's the benefit of using let. Now if we try to alert from within, obviously it works. Refresh, it works. We can change, just like we can change the value of this variable over time using var keyword. Now we can do the same with let as well. So for example, let's change this to Jen. Let's try, refresh, and it works. Okay, so it is recommended to use let instead of var. It has the same characteristics. The benefit is it doesn't get hoisted on top and become part of the window object, so that you can avoid the unexpected results in your application. Okay, in this lecture you will learn about template strings. Okay, so template strings are a better alternative to string concatenation. So I want to show you by example here. So let me create a couple of variables. Let first name, let's give Ryan. Let's create another variable, last name, like L name equals to D, and then let's create another variable called age equals to, this time what we're going to do is we're going to prompt the users to input the age. Okay, so let's use this prompt, and then we give a simple message. Yeah, guess Ryan's age. Okay, so we got these three variables: first name, last name, and the age will come from the user input. Okay, now how would we construct the sentence? The old way, let's construct this statement in a variable and let's name it result. Okay, we could say something like first name, and then we use the plus sign to concatenate, right? And then space, and then again plus, and then we could say last name, again plus, again space, again plus, age, again plus space years old. It's pretty awful, right? This is the old school way, but luckily we have new way. But this is how we would normally do, right? Let's give it a try. Let's alert this result variable. Okay, let's go to the browser and refresh. Okay, that's because I have this. If I want to use the single quote there, I can simply wrap this with double quotes. Okay, let's save this, refresh. Okay, it is asking for the age. Guess. Let's guess 30. Okay, so we get the alert, Ryan D, 30 years old. Okay, so this is how we can concatenate the strings, right? Now let's try using the template string. So let's again create the same variable. Now this time we use template string. Now the first thing you need to do is use the backticks. Okay, so these backticks are on your keyboard on the top left corner right below the escape key. So within backticks we can write whatever we like. We can have space, we can write whatever, anything. So let's construct this sentence. To embed variables inside template string, what you do is you use the $sign and the curly braces. Okay, $, curly braces, and here inside you can put variables. Okay, so we want to put the first name, right? And then we want space, right? Now we don't need to worry about plus and space and all that. We can simply have a space, simple as that. First name, and then we can also have another variable, last name, again space, is, and then again another variable age, which will come from the prompt, is years old. Just like writing plain English. How good is that? And this becomes super useful when you're making API calls. You need to construct the URL. In a situation like that, it is absolute pleasure instead of this. Okay, so this is how you create template string. Now let's give it a try. Results. Okay, let's give it a try. Refresh. Guess. Ryan D is 30 years old. So this is how easy it is and very exciting. It is one of my favorite features added in ES6. All right, so this is your introduction to template strings. Okay, this lesson is about default parameters. So with ES6, you have this ability to pass default parameters, for example, to your function arguments. Okay, so let's begin by creating a simple function and we will go from there. Okay, so function, let's call it welcome, and then it will simply alert. Okay, so I'm going to use the template string, so use two backticks. Now within these backticks, I expect, for example, this function expects the user and message. Okay, so let's give these arguments: user, message, and here I'm going to construct a sentence so that I can alert. Okay, so I will say hello. I'll call the user by the user name, so hello user, comma, and then the message. Okay, so this is the function. This function expects two arguments, user and message. Let's invoke this function. The first argument is user. Let's give name Ryan to the user, and then message is, let's say, good morning. Okay, so we have a function, we have invoked the function, we have passed the arguments, everything is perfect, it should work. Let's go to the browser, let's refresh. Hello Ryan, good morning. So that's pretty good message. So while using this function, if the arguments are passed, then this function works perfectly, right? But for example, let's imagine that this input would come from the user, and for some reason the user didn't provide the arguments, okay? Didn't provide the name, didn't provide the message. So in such case, what would happen? This function would break, right? If you refresh, hello undefined, undefined, okay? So in a situation like this, we could benefit by using the default arguments. What we could do is we could simply assign a default value to this one. For example, the user, let's give a default value of mystery person, okay? And message, let's give a default value of good day, okay? So in this case, even though there are no arguments passed, this function will not break and it will still function with the default value, okay? So let's go to the browser and try hello mystery person, good day. So this is much better than undefined, undefined, right? So obviously we can be more creative, but that's not the point. The point is to understand about default parameters, right? So this is how you can use default parameters when you're creating a function, and this is pretty awesome. I hope you like it. With ES6, we can write arrow functions. These arrow functions are a bit different than regular functions, okay? So let's begin by writing a simple regular function, and then we will try to convert it to arrow function, and we will learn more about arrow functions, okay? So let's begin by writing a simple function. I'm going to call it greeting, and it will expect two arguments, in fact just one, message, okay? And then it will simply return the alert with that message. So I'm using a template string, message, and we can write everyone, okay? So if the argument comes as good afternoon, it will simply alert good afternoon everyone, right? Simple. Now let's invoke this function. Let's give the argument of, let's say, good morning. Let's give it a try in the browser. Good morning everyone. So it works as expected. Now this function can be written in one line using arrow function, okay? So let's do that. First, let me assign it to a variable, greeting, and then arrow functions are like anonymous function without a name, right? So you begin with the parentheses for the arguments. So you don't need the function keyword to create arrow functions, okay? You begin with parentheses and then you return whatever you like to return. Now, the argument that we're taking is message, right? So this will be here. This is what we are returning, right? So this will be here. And that is all we need. So this function can be written using arrow function in one line, like so. Now, if it is just one argument, you don't even need the parentheses. What if you have more than one argument? So in that case, you would need the parentheses, and then you would add more arguments. But if it is just one argument, you don't need the parentheses. Now, you also must have noticed that we're not using the return keyword here. That's because with arrow functions, if it is just one statement that you are returning, then you don't need the return keyword. So this is just one statement we are returning, right? So we don't need the return keyword, okay? So let me comment this out. Now in this example, I'm going to have multiple if statements, okay? So let's create this arrow function. Let's assign it to a variable. create blog, it will take the argument and it will return multiple statements. Okay, so the argument it will take will be title and body, and here it will have two statements. Okay, so the first statement will be the if statement. It will check if there is no title. Okay, so if there is no title, we want to throw an error. Throw new error object, and we can simply say a title is required. Okay, so in a similar way we can also check for body. So if the body is not there, then we can also throw new error. Body can't be empty. If we get title and if we get body as well, then we can return the blog. Okay, so return, and I'm going to use the template string. Okay, so return title dash body. Okay, now let's invoke this function, create blog. Let's try it like so without title and body. Let's see what we get. Refresh. As you can see, a title is required, so obviously that works. But let's say if we give the title and let's give the blog body as well. Let's alert. Okay, as you can see, we have the blog return. Okay, so the point here is if you have more than one statement, you can use curly braces, you can use return keyword, but if it is just one statement, you don't need to do all this. Okay, so this is how you write arrow function in ES6. Now if there are no arguments, obviously you can get rid of this and you can simply have the parentheses. Okay, so if you're not expecting any arguments, you can just write it like so. Okay, and we can invoke this function and it works. Okay, so this is how arrow function simplifies things. Now there is one more thing you need to know about arrow functions, that is this keyword. Okay, so we're going to cover that in the next video. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video we're going to learn about arrow function and how they relate to this keyword. Before we understand the relationship between this keyword and the arrow function, we need to understand how it behaves with regular function. Okay, so here I have a simple function with the name of say hi. Now in JavaScript, when you create a function, they become part of the global window object, and that's important to know because when you use this keyword, it refers to the enclosing context. So in this case, you would imagine that when you use this keyword here inside, you would imagine that this refers to the function within these two curly braces, right? And that is true, but because in JavaScript, when you create a function, they become part of the global window object. When you use this, points to the window object. To prove this to you, what we can do is we can simply console log this. Okay, so this is a special keyword. So when we console log this, we are referring to the enclosing context, which is the window object. So let's go and have a look at this. So let me open up the developer tool. As you can see, we are console logging this, which refers to the window object. And if you click here, you will see window object has a lot of properties. So we should be able to see this say hi method available as the property of the window object. Let's have a look. So that begins with S. So let's go, it's in alphabetical order. If you go all the way down to S, As you can see, we have sayHi function available as method in this window object. So this refers to the enclosing context, but because the function in JavaScript become part of the window object, this refers to the window object. Okay, so once you understand that, we can see how it works with arrow function. So let me get rid of all this. With this knowledge, let's go ahead and create a simple object that will have its own properties and methods. And on that method, first we will use the regular function and we will see the problem and we will solve that problem using arrow function. Create an object, let's call it Nepal. So this will have, let's add some property, add property mountains, and it will be an array of mountains such as Everest, Fistel, Annapurna. Now let's create a method that will print all these mountains with a dash in between. Okay, so let's add the method. I'm going to call it print with a dash. In JavaScript, you know that functions can be used as the value, right? So this property will have a value of function. Okay, function. Now I'm using the old school function, and here I'm going to use set timeout method that you can use in JavaScript. So set timeout. Now it will take two arguments. The first argument is the function itself, and the second argument is the timing. So first let's create a function. Now what this function will do is it will simply console log this mountains, and what I would like to do is I would like to use this join method. This will simply join all the mountains name with a dash. Okay, so this is the first argument of function itself, and the second argument, comma separated, we can give the timing. So after 3 seconds, this function will invoke itself, the set timeout function. We can try it. Let's alert Nepal, the object and its property. Let's get mountains. Fix this typo. It should be just Everest, and we should have it comma at the end, not the semicolon, right? Because it's just the first property and then followed by the second property. Once we save, we can go to the browser and give it a try, and we can see the mountain's name, right? That's fine. That's the array. But what about print with dash? This method, can we access this method? Let's try. Print with dash. Now let's give it a try. Let's get rid of the alert here. Okay, so we are accessing the objects method. Okay, so it should print out the console log, the mountain's name in 3 seconds, right? So let's give it a try. So the problem here is it cannot read property join of undefined, which means it doesn't find the mountains. We are referring with this, but this is pointing to somewhere else, not within this context. So we need to understand clearly that this keyword is referring to which context, this context or the outer functions context or the objects context or the window object. We need to find that out, right? We can begin by just comment this out, and then let's console log here, console log this, just to find out when we use this keyword within this function, set timeout function, we want to know where does this point to, right? We can also write here, just for our reference, inside set timeout. Let's go and refresh. Okay, so inside set timeout window, so it is still pointing to the window object when we use this. Now what about we console log here, and let's write this one inside print with dash. So let's find out inside this print with dash method, this anonymous function, when we use this, let's find out where this refers to. Let's save and refresh. Okay, so inside set timeout, that is pointing to the window, but interestingly inside print with dash, it is pointing to the object itself. As you can see, the object has the mountains property and print with the dash function itself. So this can be a bit tricky to understand, but as you can see, JavaScript behaves in a bit weird way. When we use this here, it points to the window object. However, this print with the dash function is a part of this object we used as anonymous function. For that reason, it is pointing to this object, not on the window. So this is where you can benefit by using arrow function, because arrow functions don't have their own enclosing context. So if you use it within another function, in this case this anonymous function which is part of this object, this keyword used inside the arrow function will point to the enclosing or outer function context. Okay, so let's do that. Let's comment this out. Let's comment this out as well. And what we can do is we can use, let's bring it back. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. This problem can be fixed by changing this function, the first argument of this set timeout method. Let's change this to arrow function, and it is pretty straightforward. We can get rid of the function keyword. We can get rid of these curly braces because it's just one statement we're returning. And now all we have to do is use this arrow, right? Now we can even put it in one line, so makes more readable. Okay, and let's get rid of this semicolon. So this is all we need to do. Because this arrow function don't have their own context, this will refer to this function, this outer function, the wrapping function. And this function, as we know, is part of this object, right? So when you access this object and invoke this method, it will behave properly. Let's save this one and give it a try. Refresh. In 3 seconds, we see the outcome. Awesome. So this is important to understand because in React you will be using this pattern, this way of writing code. Okay, so this is it. This is your introduction to the arrow functions and this keyword. Hello and welcome. Now in this video you're going to learn about ES6 destructuring. So we can break down the object or array structure into variables. Okay, so let's start with this example. Let's create an object and let's name it things to do. So this object, let's say it will have cover of key value pairs, such as let's say morning, and morning will do exercise, right? And in the afternoon we'll work, and in the evening let's say we code. at night we do more than one thing. So let's give it a value of array, and we do sleep, and then once we sleep we dream as well, right? Okay, so it's a simple object, and we have a couple of key value pairs, and it holds the value of string, and this time it's the value of array. Okay, so this object, let's say we want to use it, but we don't want to use the evening, we don't want to use the night, we just want to use the morning and afternoon. So there's a better way of using extracting the variables out of the object using destructuring. Okay, so let's say I want to get the morning and afternoon out of this object and don't worry about anything else. So what I can do is I can just create a variable with let and use this object literal syntax and assign it to things to do, right? So now I can start destructuring. So for example, I can destructure the morning out of that object structure. So this is the object structure and I'm destructuring. Okay, so I just want to take out the morning and afternoon. Okay, now once you do this, you are ready to use these keys as individual variables. Okay, so for example, let's say console log, let's console log morning and afternoon. Okay, with dash in between. Okay, now let's give it a try. So we have these values available as variables to use because we did object destructuring. Okay, so let's give it a try. First, let's go inspect console, and as you can see, we have got the variables extracted, destructured from the object, exercise and work. So those are the values these variables hold. Now you can also change their value as well, just like you would do with a regular variable. Okay, so for example, morning, let's say you want to do something else, so you don't want to exercise, let's say you want to run, you simply assign the value again, different value, save and give it a refresh, and you see it changed. Okay, so it's pretty flexible and it becomes super useful. And in fact, this way of writing code is all over when you're working with React. Okay, this is a very simple example of object destructuring in ES6. Before I end this video, I want to show you one more example of using object destructuring, and this time with function arguments. Okay, so let's begin by creating a function. Let's name it uni student. Okay, and it will take the student as argument. Okay, this is an arrow function and it will return, let's console log, and let's build this up. Let's use this template string. Within these two backticks we can use the variables, right? So using the $sign and curly braces, let's say student.name, because we are expecting an object, so this object will have name property and the university. Okay, so console log student name from, let's say, this is the old way by the way, and then I will show you how you can improve it with destructuring. Okay, so let's work with this first, student.university. Okay, so we are taking this student object, let's pass this object via function argument. Okay, so let's use this uni student, this function, it will take the argument student object, right? So this object will have name property with the value of the student name and university property with the value of, let's say, So we have this function and it will take the object as an argument. Now we're not using any destructuring here. This is the old way of doing things, right? Using the dot notation, getting the property out of the object. Okay, so let's see. Let's give it a try. Refresh. Ryan from University of Sydney. Well expected, right? But how can we improve this code using destructuring? So what we can do, we can destructure within this function. Okay, so let's say let's use this destructuring, and we want to destructure the variables from student, right? Okay, and within here, what we want to use, we want to use the name and university, right? So we can say so like name. Now instead of writing like so, all we need to do is we can use the name and we can use the university. We don't need to use the dot notation because we're already destructured it, right? So this way it works. So this is the benefit of using destructuring. If you're working with a larger object, this really simplifies your code. Okay, so let's give it a try, refresh, and it still works. So that's cool, but you can go one step further. What you can do is you can destructure while taking as an argument. So what you can do is instead of even doing show, you can directly destructure while taking an argument. So you would normally use the parentheses if it is more than one argument, right? So within here, you can apply destructuring while taking it as an argument like so. Okay, so this also works, which is pretty cool. So let's go, give it a try, refresh. As you can see, perfect. Okay, so you can use destructuring in various ways to simplify your code, and this is one of the exciting features added in ES6. Okay, let's learn about destructuring an array. So just like we did with objects in the previous lesson, we can do with arrays as well. So let's say we have an array. So let's say we have an array of mountains. Okay, Everest, Fishtail, Annapurna. Okay, so this is an array of mountains, and let's say I want to get the first one. Okay, so using array destructuring, what you can do is you can simply assign it to a new name, new array. So let's say first mountain. Okay, with this, if it comes a log first mountain, you will get the Everest because that is the first, right? So let's give it a try, refresh, we get Everest. Okay, now let's say you want to get the second item of the array. So what you would do, like in the old way, you would use like 0 to get the first item, 1 to get the second, and 2 to get the third, right? So this works in a similar fashion. So this is we just named it whatever we like, we can name. I named it first mountain. So let's say I want to get the second item. So what I can do is I can simply comma separate. Okay, so comma separate and don't pass anything there. So in this case, it will skip the first one and give you the second one. Okay, now we can change the name or leave it like so, doesn't matter. Let's give it a try. As you can see, we get the second mountain. Awesome, right? Now let's say you want to get the third one, you can comma separate one more time. Now first item comma, second item comma, so both of them are skipped and you get the third one. Okay, so if you give it a refresh, you see Annapurna. So this is how array destructuring works. Just like destructuring, we can also restructure. Okay, so restructuring is the process of putting back together. For example, with object literal enhancement, we can grab variables from the global scope and turn them into an object. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's see how we can do this. Let's say we have variable name, let's say Everest. Okay, and let's say we have another variable height 8848. Okay, so these two variables are available in the global scope. So let's use these variables to create an object. Okay, so let's say var adventure climbing. Okay, so this is an object, and we create this object using these variables, name and height. So this is restructured, and please ignore my linter error. I need to fix this one. Okay, so this is fine. Now let's try console logging this variable adventure climbing. Okay, let's give it a try, and we see an object. We have created a new object. We restructured. Beautiful. So name and height are now keys of this adventure climbing object. We can also create object methods with restructure. So let's create this method. Let's name it, let's create a variable first. Let's call it output, and this will hold the value of function. Okay, this function. Now this function, what it will do, it will console log. Let's use this template literal. So within these two backticks, let's say mount, and we get the mountain's name. So $, within curly braces, let's say this name, okay, is this height meter tall. Okay, now what we can do is we can access this method. So adventure climbing dot output. Okay, we don't need to put inside console log, so we can just invoke this function. So when we invoke this function, it will console log. So let's give it a try. Refresh. Okay, so we forgot to add this one. Save, refresh, and Mount Everest is 8,848 meters tall. Okay, so this is how you can restructure the object, add properties and methods. Now why don't we try putting them all inside this object? Okay, because I want to show you one more thing you can do with ES6. Okay, so let's copy all this, let's put it here, and we need to make some changes. So let's say name, let's get rid of this equal sign, and let's assign the value of Everest, and get rid of the colon and use comma instead. So these are the properties of this object now. Okay, so let's get rid of this, use colon and then use comma. So the first property is the name, second is the height, and the third is this function. So what you could do is you could use this property named output. It would hold the value of function, right? Then get rid of this colon. Okay, so this is how you could create an object, right? This is the old way. Add the name properties and methods. Okay, this is a function. Now we should still be able to access this. That works fine. However, with ES6 you don't need to use this function keyword. Okay, so what you can do is you can get rid of this and use directly like so. Okay, so this is another thing you can do with ES6. Now we can still access this like so. Refresh, it's fine. Hi, how are you doing? Now in this video you're going to learn about a spread operator. It is also used as a rest operator and also as spread operator. So in both cases what you would do is you would use 3 dots. Okay, so you can use this to combine 2 arrays into one, or combine 2 objects into one. Okay, and when you combine, it does not modify or mutate the original source. So the original array or object stays as it is. It doesn't get modified. Rather, we create a new instance, new object or new array. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's create a simple example, and we use this spread operator on arrays and objects. Okay, so let's begin with arrays. Let's create a variable. Let's call it mountains. Okay, and then let's create this array and let's add a couple of mountains. Okay, Everest, Fishtail, and Annapurna. Okay, so we got 3 mountains in this array. Now let's say we got more mountains. We got another variable that contains some other another array with more mountains. Okay, so let's say variable mountains from Japan. Let's say Fuji. Now it can have more, but let's just keep Fuji because I don't know any other name of the mountains from Japan. Okay, so we got the mountains variable which contains 3 mountains, and this variable contains 1 more. So total we got 4 mountains. Okay, so what I would like to do is I would like to create a new variable that contains both of these. Okay, so using spread operator, what we can do is let's say var all mountains equals to this array. It will spread out all the contents of the mountains. Okay, mountains, and also we spread out the mountains from Japan. Okay, so now this variable contains this array mountains and this array using these 3 dots comma separated. Okay, now if you console log all mountains, what we see is we see all these mountains from the first variable and the Fuji as well, the second variable. So this will become very useful when you're working in an actual application. For example, let's say you have a state that contains a certain data, and then you might get additional data from the API. You make API request and you get more data. Okay, so you might want to combine both data and render into your application, right? In a situation like that, it can become very useful. Now let's try using it on object as well. We did this on array. Now let's try on objects. Let's create a variable called day. This is an object, and this will have, let's say, breakfast. This will contain the breakfast food. Let's say toast with milk. Okay, and then let's say lunch. Let's say rice with chicken curry. Okay, so this object contains breakfast and lunch, and let's say we get one more object variable, let's say night, and let's say this one contains dinner, noodle soup. Okay, so we got these 2 objects. So what we want to do is we want to combine both of these objects and produce a new object. Okay, so what we can do is we can, let's say we are doing this for picnic. Okay, so we want to take all the foods we would eat in a day to our picnic. So using these 3 dots, we can use on day object, and then we can also use on night object. Okay, now console log picnic. Let's see what we get. Okay, we're missing one more. Okay, so make sure we have 3. Save, refresh, and as you can see, we get one single object which contains breakfast, dinner, and lunch. So this becomes extremely useful in real-world application. Now let me create one more object, one more example, and this example will show you how you can use it to get the rest of the elements. Okay, so these three dots can be used as a spread as well as a rest. So let's have a look at the rest side of it. Okay, so let's create a variable called rivers. So this is an array, and this will contain a couple of rivers: Sunkosi, Tamakosi, Saptakosi. Okay, so we got these three rivers. Now let's say I want to get the first one and the rest. Okay, so what you can do is you can create a variable using the array destructuring, and what you can do is you can say first you want to get the first, and then you want to get 3.rest. Okay, now what you can do, you can console log, and let's say we want to see the first one only. Okay, so let's see, we get only the first one, Sunkosi. Now if we want to get the rest, we can do rest, so this would give us the rest, not the first one, right? So refresh, as you can see, we got the rest but not the first one. And this works exactly the same way in an object as well. So this is how we can use these three dots as rest or spread operator in ES6. Hi, how are you doing? Now in this video you're going to learn about classes. Okay, so in JavaScript previously there was no official classes in JavaScript. So what we could do is we could create a function and add methods on that function object, okay, using the prototype. So one thing you should know, that in JavaScript functions are objects. Whenever you create an object, the prototype object is also created behind the scene. So using this prototype we could create something like class. Okay, so this is how we would do previously. So let's do it so we get better understanding of how classes works in JavaScript. Okay, so let's create this simple function. Let's call it holiday. Let's make it capital. Function holiday, and let's say it will take two arguments, destination and let's say days. Okay, now we could refer using this keyword, this destination. So this destination equals to destination, this days equals to days. Okay, so this is a function we have here. Now what we could do is we could add a method to this function using prototype. So what you could do, you could say holiday dot prototype. Okay, access this holiday function's prototype object and add info into it. So this is a function, and this function could do something. For example, let's console log. Let's say this, then destination plus, let's use this pipe symbol, plus this days plus days. Okay, so let's try using this variable. Let's say Nepal equals to, let's create a new instance of it, new holiday. Okay, and we can pass the arguments. Say Nepal is the destination and days, let's say 30. Okay, so console log Nepal, and we want to access the method info, right, out of Nepal. So we create a function, we added this method to this function, and we create a new instance of it, and then we console log and we access this new functions, this method. Okay, so let's save, give it a try. Let's make sure it's small letter, save. Okay, so Nepal 30 days. Okay, so this is how you would add method to the function object, right? Now there's a better way of creating classes in ES6, so let's give that a try. Let's get rid of this. So let's create this class holiday. Okay, now before we add any properties or methods, let's see how it works. Let's console log this holiday class. Okay, so we get this object. Okay, that's expected, but now we're not going to use prototype like we did before. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use the constructor. Okay, so what is constructor? Just to make you understand what is constructor, I'm going to use console log holiday.prototype. Okay, so like I told you earlier, when we create a function, this prototype object is created behind the scene. Now, even though this is a class, this is technically a function behind the scene, and in JavaScript, functions are objects. Okay, so let's give it a try. Let's see what it holds. Holiday.prototype. Let's save. Let's refresh, and as you can see, we have this object with constructor. Okay, so it can take the arguments. So constructor, that's how it works. So it is part of the prototype object that is created behind the scene and ready for us to use. What we can do is we can call this constructor inside this class and set the properties. Okay, so what I can do is constructor. Now inside here, what we can say is we can first, it will take the arguments destination and days, just like we did earlier, and we can set this destination equals to destination and this days equals to days. Okay, so whenever we create a new instance of this holiday using the new keyword and pass in the arguments, that will be available here, and this class, this constructor method will set the arguments as property to this class. Okay, now once we have the properties, we can also add more methods. So let's say we have info method, and this will simply console log. Let's use this backtick. Okay, let's say this destination will take this days. Okay, so this is how we can create a class. We add properties, we add methods. Now we can use this class as many times as we need. For example, let's create const trip equals to new using this new keyword. Let's instantiate this class new holiday, and let's give it an argument. Let's say Nepal, and let's give actually Kathmandu, Nepal, and then the days, let's give 30. Okay, now we can see console log trip, and we want to access its method info, right? Let's invoke this here. Let's save, go here, refresh. Kathmandu, Nepal will take 30 days. Okay, so this is how we can create classes in ES6, use the constructor to set the properties, and we add methods like so, and we can reuse it using this new keyword. We can instantiate as many times as we need. Now let's go one step further and let's see how we can extend from one class to another. Okay, so children class can extend from parent class so that all these properties and methods from the parent class are available to the children class when the children extends to this parent class. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Let's get rid of this. So we have this class. Let's treat it as super class or parent class. Okay, let's just comment here. And then the children class, we can name them subclass. Okay, so they are known as superclass and subclass. Okay, so let's create another class that will extend from holiday. So let's say class expedition extends holiday. Okay, so the first thing we can do is we can call the constructor, so it will take the argument of destination, days, and as well as let's add one more thing, let's add some gear as well. Okay, so that's the whole point of we are extending, because we want to add this gear property. Okay, so what we can do is we don't need to say again this destination, this days, because we are extending from this class. So these properties are available here because it's extending. So all we need to do is super and then destination and then days. So what's happening here is we are calling the super class, the parent class, and passing the arguments to the parent class. So they will be processed here. When we instantiate this expedition class, we will get the arguments of destination, days, and gear, but destination and days, we are passing it to parent for the handling. So in other classical object-oriented languages, you would use parent keyword. In JavaScript, this is how you do. Use this super. Okay, so constructor super, pass it to the super class, and this class, this expedition, will only handle the gear. Okay, so it will set the gear property to on its own. Now we can still access the info method from the parent class, the super class holiday, right? So what we can do is we can use this and here we can access this super info. So this method, exactly the way it outputs, so we can use that, and we can also add our own console log. Okay, so this is how we can override the method. We're extending from the parent, so we still using this info method, but we are overriding. So we taking everything there is, it is outputting, we using that, and we are adding additional information as well. So console log, let's say bring your gears as well. So what we can do, let's use this backticks, bring your this gear, and what we can do is we can join. Okay, so let's join this gear dot, let's use this join method, okay, with and here. Okay, now let's try this const, let's create a new instance of this new expedition. Let's name it const trip with gear. Okay, so let's say new expedition, and let's give the arguments. So the arguments, the first one will be the destination, let's say Everest, and days, let's say 30, and then let's say we pass in the gear, the array of RF items, okay, as our gear. So let's say sunglasses, let's say flags, let's say camera. So this is the superclass. This subclass is extending the superclass and we instantiating it here. Let's trip with gear dot info. Let's try accessing this method. So let's give it a try. Okay, so airbrush will take 30 days. So that is the output of this parent info class, info method. And we also added bring your sunglasses and your flags and your camera. Okay, so these are the gears we added. So when we instantiate this new class, we get whatever it inherits from the parent as well as new console log. Okay, so the point here is this is how we can create a class in ES6. We can another subclass can extend, and we still set the constructor. We use a super to access the super class or the parent class. Okay, and this is how we work with classes in ES6. Okay, so now this is important because this is how you would be working in React. Okay, you would be setting the constructor properties, super properties, and that's how you will go. You will add the methods like so. All right, so with this you would be very comfortable getting started with React.